So welcome to Advancing Our Careers, International Student Panel Discussion. My name is Justin Harford. I'm the project coordinator with the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, NCDE, a project that is sponsored by the Department of State and supported by Mobility International USA. Before we get started with this panel discussion, I first want to invite my colleague Joey Lunny to explain to us some rules and things to know about accessibility for this webinar.
Hi everyone, my name is Joey Lunny Moran, and I have some slides on screen right now that I'm going to be reading out to share access tips for everybody for this session. Please turn off your microphones and videos until a moderator invites you to turn them on. We're going to have an interpreter and our three panelists on screen the whole time. To view captions, click on the CC button or use the stream text link provided in the chat box. Change to gallery view at the top corner to view slides, interpreter, and presenter. If you have a comment or a question, send a chat to the host. Use hide non-video participants feature to make it easier to see the interpreter and speakers. So now I'm going to share how to do the hide non-video participants feature. So to make it easier for you to be able to see the interpreter and active presenters, you can remove the clutter from your Zoom screen. We have two images on the slides right now. The before image is of a Zoom meeting that sort of shows a clutter of small boxes. Some have videos on, others only have names. And you can tell that it's just a really clotted screen. And the one after, once you do hide non-video participants, it only shows you participants who have their videos on. In order to do this, find any participant whose video is turned off, select the top three in the top right corner, the three little dots, and select hide non-video participants from the drop-down menu. Some keyboard shortcuts. If you're using a computer, you can use these shortcuts. Alt-A for mute, Alt-H for chat, Alt-Y to raise hand, or Alt-V for video. All right, Justin, I'll pass it back to you to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Joey Lunny. And we were having a little bit of technical difficulty earlier with getting the non-video participants thing to hide properly. So anyway, we apologize. You know, if you have any issues with this, let us know in the survey, and we'll do our best to figure out what technical issue is going on here. But in the meanwhile, we welcome you to this webinar. And the goal of this discussion is for you to get a sense of how students with disabilities can study in the United States. The hope is that prospective students from other countries will realize that these opportunities are really for them, and that there's a way that you as a person from another country can come to study in the United States, especially as a person with a disability, and also hopefully will draw some attention to international educators on how their colleges can do more work to provide outreach and opportunities to students like the students and alumni, actually, like the ones that we have on this panel today. So without further ado, I want to just go ahead and give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves. And I'm going to go ahead and start with Sergio Talisnik.
Thank you, Justin. So my name is Sergio Talisnik. I'm from Argentina, and I'm a systems engineer, and I did a master's degree in aeronautics in Daytona Beach, Florida. I started in 2017, and I finished last year. So I was in the US 2 years, and I have a spinal cord injury, cervical. So I have a quadriplegia. That means I'm a wheelchair user and I need some assistance. So I guess I'm gonna be talking about that a little later.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Sergio. And how about Justice? Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, viewers. My name is Justice Chukwu. I am a Nigerian lawyer and a graduate student in International Peace Studies, University of Notre Dame. I am a social advocate, a social justice advocate, and peace building scholar practitioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio. And how about Wei Wang?
Hello, everyone. My name is Wei Wang. I'm from China, and I studied at Gallaudet University and American University and received my degree in film. And now I work as a film producer and designer in China.
Perfect. Thank you, Wei. Just one thing I forgot to mention, this discussion is also being recorded, and a recording will be made available after, along with the transcript. So now I'm going to go back to Sergio and ask him to, Sergio, if you could please describe your disability to us, including any sorts of reasonable accommodations or adjustments that you have required to be successful.
Sure, Justin. So I guess I already responded a little bit of that. So again, I have a spinal cord injury. I have a cervical spinal cord injury. So I have a quadriplegia. That basically means that I'm a wheelchair user. I have limited use of my fingers, and I just use the wheelchair to move all around. So the biggest accommodations that I needed was physical accessibility. You know, like a good place to live. You know, where I lived, I lived on campus, so my room was adapted for wheelchairs, and the campus was all adapted to wheelchairs. You know, ramps and wide open doors, self-opening doors. You know, with the buttons. And one very important thing was that I had to live with a personal assistant. I don't need it 24/7, but I was required by the university to live with one. If I wanted to live on the university, I would have to live with a personal assistant. So that was one of the major things that I had to deal with when I did my experience in the U.S.
Thank you, Sergio. And let's direct this question now to Justice. Justice, could you tell us tell us about your disability and the reasonable accommodations or adjustments that you require that you're requiring to be successful at your program in the United States?
Thank you for this question, Justin. I am blind, and yeah, so I'm blind. I'm blind, and when it comes to any adjustments or requirement that I might need, I would say that as far as this program is concerned, I do not think I need anything at this point because so far I have a computer, a working system, which the university procured for me. Then I also have a JAWS, a complete JAWS version, which a friend donated to me. I have support student staff, which the university also provided for me. I also have access to the disability office here on campus, which the university provided for me. I also have well, a befitting, I would say befitting housing accommodation, which also the university made available for me, even though I had to pay some amount of money monthly. So when it comes to adjustment, well, maybe I would still, I would need mobility, like, but that might pose a little more difficulty because I need like a regular person that would be with me, that will be walking. I mean, going for a walk, because exercise is also part of life and living. But so far, I think so good with the university.
Thank you, Justice. I mean, one of our questions actually that we got from one of our registrants, I was reviewing questions in our registration earlier today, it had to do with how students, particularly those with sensory disabilities like blindness, manage to access language learning. And you mentioned a variety of accommodations that maybe, I don't know if everybody would really know about, maybe like that person who asked that question, but you mentioned JAWS, Job Access with Speech. It's a program that basically translates the visual information on a computer screen into a spoken interface that you can navigate around using a keyboard. And so, I mean, you mentioned about also the services that the Disability Service provides for you and that they hired students to work with you. Is that like to support with reading or with writing, like scribe work or sighted guide? Like, how would you describe that?
Well, coming to the student staff, then I was still trying to understand how to navigate the school campus. So what the student staff did for me was to take me to class and sometimes bring me back. I also had the opportunity to be with the student staff. Let's say I want to access my emails, because most times we have tons of emails, right? So then I hadn't known much and how to access my email. So she did that for me, and she still does sometimes. Then the university Sakai, which was so technical for me. Also, she also helps me in doing that. Then sometimes she would be available to help me maybe go to university health services and just places that that I might need official attention or assistance on campus. So I mean, typically she was like an assistant to me, and sometimes again, she helps me not do assignment, but like sometimes we work together. She makes readings. Sometimes she makes readings accessible for me, and also with the collaboration of the university and the disability office, the readings are usually made available for me.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, as like yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think people don't really realize the variety of options there are for blind people to read textbooks and other written materials in using the help of a screen reader or a device that can output that with information into Braille. Thank you, Justice. And moving on now to Wei Wang. I think one of my first challenges, or one of my first surprises, is if I was talking to you and I didn't know your disability, I would, as a blind person, I wouldn't realize. But you're speaking through an interpreter, so but I wonder if you could maybe describe to us your disability and kind of some of the accommodations that you use, the reasonable accommodations that you use to be successful.
Thank you. Yes, I identify as a deaf person and I use sign language. And I went to 2 different universities. So I have very different experiences in both. At Gallaudet University, I was able to access everything because the entire school uses sign language. But when I went to American University, I was the only deaf person. And so therefore I had to get accommodations and prepare ahead of time to make sure that interpreters were available. I had to make sure that I picked the preferred interpreters that I wanted and make sure that I gave them the classroom numbers to prepare them for which class they needed to go to. And the disability office was very helpful, but it was a lot more coordination. And so a lot of times it could be a little bit awkward because there were specific needs that would come up during classes. Sometimes the professor didn't have any experience with deaf people, so they needed to know that interpreters needed to be in the front of the class, that they needed to be visible, that it was hard for me to take notes and to memorize the content. So I would need to request a note taker so that someone could write the notes while I was watching the interpreter. And that way I was able to keep track of the entire classroom experience and what the teacher was saying. And also trying to get through and understand the English because it's a second language. And also making sure that every video, as I was a film major, had closed caption or subtitles. And that was a very big experience trying to get everybody on board. But as people had me in their classes, the film program did start to learn about what the needs were. And so the university began to provide more closed captioning, and it became something that they had in store for other students that came along. So, and students also had to work in teams, which created some situations where they were working with me in teams where I was the only deaf person. So I used video relay services through an interpreter on a phone where they could call into using their hearing phone, their normal phone, they could call a special number and I could use a sign language interpreter that would relay the message to me. And because of all this assistance, I was able to be quite successful.
Question, Wei. So when those meetings that you had with students, they were in person with you, but the video relay service that we have in the United States was how you were able to communicate with them.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I definitely used that.
That's cool. Yeah. And
I did when it came to student meetings, I would have an in-person interpreter, and sometimes that was challenging because students wanted to have last-minute meetings, or they weren't scheduling. They weren't able to schedule in advance, and not always. That didn't always mean that I had an interpreter available for those kind of meetings. So a lot of times, what we would do is we would have them talk in a meeting, and I would look either at a screen that was using voice to text, and then I would see the text read out on my phone, or sometimes they would call me and have a phone there, and then I would watch the phone as the interpreter on the phone. But of course, that would reduce my battery very quickly. So there was a lot of challenges that we had to maintain or to figure out.
It's a great story.
And so once the batteries were dead, we moved to writing back and forth on paper and pen, with paper and pen.
It's an interesting story because I think like people, that's true. When you have they have interpreters at universities in the United States, but if you're at a place like American University, you have to still schedule them. So, and I think a lot of people would think about the free video relay service in the United States as being something you only use when you're talking to someone over the phone, but that was an interesting way that you were able to use it for last minute meetings. And you also had an interesting thing. I remember you told me a few years back about how you when you worked at the Apple Store and how you communicated with customers through writing. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a while ago. Mm-hmm.
so I think that it definitely shows too, like, there's a lot of resources and ways that people can be successful in the United States and in academia and even working later on. But it requires self-advocacy. Wei, I want to direct this next question to you, and we'll kind of go back down the panel, but what motivated you originally to study in the United States?
So when I was in China, I was a regular employee working with hearing people, and a lot of them looked at me like I was young and couldn't do anything. I was deaf, and they didn't think I was able to go to university. They didn't think it was important for me. And I felt that it was important. And I decided to look for a program that would allow me to go to school. So I contacted some people. I said, I'd like to learn. I'd like to go to the university. And the ones in China denied me that opportunity because I was deaf and I couldn't access the instruction because they didn't have the kind of resources that there are in the United States. And so a lot of them didn't know what to do and were a little bit afraid of letting me into a school program because of that. And there were no interpreters available. So then I had a friend named Yang, Jeannie, and she had had a good experience at school in the United States. And I said, but I don't have any English, so I wouldn't be able to study in English. But she said, that's all right. The university program that I went to is in sign language, and they teach English once you get there. So I thought that would be a great opportunity for me to travel to the United States and get that university education there, where I also learned English and learned American Sign Language in a year and a half. And then I passed my exam and was able to take the TOEFL and then go into Gallaudet University and study.
Excellent. Thanks, Wei. That's such a great story. TOEFL is the exam of teaching English as a teaching. It's an English proficiency exam. Thank you so much, Wei. That's great. That's a great story. And I'm going to now direct this question on to Justice Chukwu. What was your motivation for studying in the United States, Justice? And you're actually I think you're the one student here who actually still is completing your program.
Thank you, Justin. I was excited when you pronounced my second name very accurately. Yeah, so coming to what motivated me to study in the United States. Yes, quite a lot. I am interested in becoming a diplomat, and my interests actually, my research shows that that it is best for me to study in an environment where I could have access to first-hand experts, diplomats, directors, lawmakers, change makers, policy makers, advocates. I mean, so that I would be able to have a robust experience during my program, my graduate study program. So I decided that I was gonna look for admission in the United States. I know that there are other countries, but given the fact that, the United States, let me say, the position of the United States in global affairs is second to none. And also given the fact that most headquarters of international organizations like the UN and which is primarily my interest, is situate in the United States. And also I made a personal research and found out that the University of Notre Dame has access and network with alumni members and others who are vast in global affairs, in peace studies, in international peace, and so on and so forth. So those were my driving force, that actually uh, informed my decision to study in the United States.
Excellent. Thanks, Justice. And now I'm going to direct the same question to Sergio. Sergio, tell us about your original motivation for coming to study in the United States.
Well, I guess my main idea was I needed something disruptive to foster my career. Like, of course, I could have advanced my career down here in Argentina, but I knew that that doing a master's degree in the United States was gonna was going to benefit my career in a very explosive way. Okay, it's like the rate of progression was gonna be like very steep, because I knew, just as Justice said, in the US is where everything is happening, and I wanted to study aviation. And regarding aviation, the United States is one of the countries working on the most up-to-date issues. Like you also have Europe, you also have Asia with big aviation industries, but definitely the United States is like a big one. So I also had like a feeling with the language. I already spoke English back then, so I knew that if I wanted to study like in Europe or maybe in Asia, that was going to be an extra challenge. So that was also a major decision point. But the most important reason was to foster my career and also to have an international experience, because I didn't have one before that, and I knew that was gonna make me grow as a person, not only professionally, not only academically, but it's also a learning experience as a person.
Excellent. Great. And thank you so much for that. And now going back to Wei Wang, Wei, could you tell us what programs did you choose for? And so you actually did two different programs in the United States, and you've alluded to them already, but maybe just give us the summary of what were the different programs you completed.
Sure. At Gallaudet University, I got a degree in digital marketing, digital media, excuse me. And at American University, my last degree was an MFA in film and video and digital media.
Perfect. And that was a master's degree.
Yes.
Okay.
At
Great.
American Universities, an MFA is a master's in fine arts. So it's a little bit different than a master's degree. But yes, it's on the master's level.
Nice. Perfect. And Justice, moving on to Justice, what program did you choose?
All right. Thank you very much, Justin, for this question once again. I chose MGA, meaning Masters of Global Affairs. Is at the Keele School of Global Affairs, the University of Notre Dame. MGA is a program, like it's a program that has three concentrations, major concentrations, which include international peace studies, sustainable development, and global affairs major. So I, for once, chose international peace studies concentration. Yeah.
Perfect, perfect. And Sergio, so you were interested in aeronautics, right? And so you went to actually a very specialized college in Florida. Could you tell us about the degree program in the college?
Absolutely, absolutely. So as you said, I studied a master's degree in aeronautics. It is not aeronautical engineering, and I always clarify this because it's a common misconception. I actually studied the business side and the operations side of the aviation industry. So everything that has to do, uh, you know, engineering has to do with the design and maintenance of the vehicle, of the aircraft, and I did not study that, but I did study all the management that happens at the airports and airlines, as well as all the operations that happen at airports of aircraft. And I did study, as you said, in a university that is specific for aerospace, which is Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. It has a campus in Daytona Beach, Florida. It also has another one in Arizona, but the main one is in Daytona Beach, Florida. And yeah, it's specialized. Almost every single program that it has is somehow related with the aerospace industry.
Thank you, Sergio. And actually, I'm going to direct this next question to you. And it's actually something I originally was going to ask, but it's also related to a question from one of our registrants about how students can bring personal care attendants or PCAs to the United States. And I just kind of want to also draw viewers' attention to the fact that Sergio actually joined us on a webinar a couple of years ago, specifically about personal care attendants. But Sergio, I just kind of was wondering, I would like you to just give us a quick nutshell description of what was it like for you to bring your PCA from Argentina to the United States, and if you just kind of had to explain this in a nutshell to someone.
Absolutely. Let's try to shrink that. But I do want to insist on that webinar. I think that's on the website, Justin, right?
It is.
It has all the information. Yeah.
Recording
so I strongly
and
suggest
transcript.
that person. Yeah, I strongly suggest that person to go and look at it. But let me try to make it short on that one. The first thing, it is possible. You just need to take care of a couple of things. You need to take care of a visa. Okay, you need to look at the right visa. You need to make sure that you go to the embassy to request the visa for that person. You need to make sure that you have all the documentation. It's really not that hard, but you need to be like very precise. Okay, you need to make sure that you have all the documents and that all the documents have the exact information that they need. If you comply with all that, you should not have any problem. Okay, so it can be a little stressful, but if you organize yourself, it shouldn't be that bad. Then, I mean, I think that one of the hardest thing that could happen would be to try to find the funding, because nobody's gonna pay, like you have to pay for that, okay? Even though you have an amazing Department of Disability and a disability office, just as Justice said, they help you with a lot. I think Wei also mentioned, like they are very helpful, but they're not gonna pay for an assistant that lives with you, like the one that I had. Okay, so I had to pay for it, and that's like one big challenge if money is a problem, which normally can be. So that really depends on the person. So there's really not big advice, but you can always try to find, throughout family, your friends, your community, seeing if you can get any scholarship that pay for that. So, money is something that you will need to worry about. Then once you get into the US, there are a couple of, it's not just getting the visa and getting in, but also once you get inside the US with your personal assistant, there are a couple of things from an immigration perspective that you need to take care. You need to present a couple of forms, and those forms have to be presented on time just to make sure that you don't have any problem. So again, you just need to really know exactly what you need to present when. Some of those forms have, you need to pay for them. So you need to think in advance that you will have to pay. It's like $400, $500 each. And you might need to present them like once a year. So you need to know all those things in advance so they don't catch you like in a surprise, and all of a sudden you find yourself in an awful situation. So again, it's possible, completely doable. I did it, And you just need to be like very precise on every step.
Perfect. Thank you, Sergio. Yeah, and as you might kind of be inferring from listening to Sergio talk, he's with the large percentage of students that we've known who have chosen to bring their PA from their home country with them because of the fact that it can be expensive, and also there's the challenge too, just finding someone that you trust that you can work with. So many people will choose to bring a PA with them as a contrast to finding one when they get in the United States. I did
Yeah, and
see, yes.
sorry, Justin, sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned something very, very important, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this. Like I took it from my country. I brought it from my country, was the fact that I knew that if I hired someone in the US, it was gonna cost me a lot more. Okay, it was really
Yeah,
a matter of money. I knew I could have found
exactly.
someone, but I needed someone not only to support me like on my daily tasks, but I also needed them for physical therapy. Okay, and I would have to pay a person that does physical therapy is really expensive to pay for all that. So I really made a good deal at bringing a person from the from my country. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, if a student is, so I definitely encourage folks, if you're trying to work this out, contact us at clearinghouse@mayusa.org. We can kind of guide you through some of the visa particulars and the particulars of coverage. So don't, and also I encourage you to take a look at the webinar that Sergio joined us for a while back. And one thing I can also share from my own observations, I did hear a podcast on BBC Ouch, which is another, it's a podcast about disability. And a couple years ago, they actually had an interesting woman who studied at Stanford. She's from the United Kingdom. And apparently her country actually paid for her PA to come with her. So they gave her some sort of an allowance to pay for her personal care attendance while she was at Stanford. This was something must have been related to the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. So if you're from a more expensive country, that might be something you can check into. I know it definitely works in the case, might work in the case of the UK. Now, this next question, I want to draw back to Wei Wang, and I'm going to actually frame this a little bit differently in the sense that we've already kind of covered a little bit what the difference between studying at Gallaudet University is, and the difference, which is Gallaudet is a college where all classes are given in sign language, and the difference between that and say American University, which is a college for where there's mostly hearing students, and you have to ask for extra accommodations on top of, in addition to what everybody else has to ask for in order to get communication access. But I want to know, because you chose to go to Gallaudet first and then you chose to go to American. From that experience, what would you say is kind of the advantage of going with each? Like, I think it's kind of apparent the disadvantages of say going to a hearing university versus a deaf university. But what do you think are kind of the advantages of each option for a deaf student considering trying to make this choice?
Sure. So if you remember, English is my second language. So I studied in the United States without any English at first. So for me, it was much better to start in a university that had sign language so that I could learn English through my first language. Or it was sign language, it was American Sign Language, but it was a language that I could access faster than English. And so that would make, I could then really quickly access the rest of the university even before my English was at the level that I could use for university studies. So it was a great place where I was very included, and it was perfect for me. It was much more comfortable there. So when I arrived at Gallaudet University, it really filled me, and I felt like I was equal and I had an identity that I hadn't felt before. So that really built me up, and the sign language was great, and it gave me a much faster access to English than I would have had if I had to try to study through an interpreter. There was really no communication issues because I was able to pick everything up really quickly and communicate with friends. I was able to learn different cultures from the different people and the diversity at the campus. And there were a lot of people there. And so it really impacted me. And I felt that that was a huge plus. When I went to American University, it was quite different. American University obviously is all hearing, as you mentioned, and there's no sign language except for me. So I felt like it was a bit of a challenge. No one knew deaf culture there. And so
what would you say
I
was
was
the
building
advantage?
the university. But I would like to I'll get to that.
Okay.
So American University was obviously not the same as Gallaudet, but there were some things that were positive with American University. They had many more majors. There were more challenges for me. I was able to learn lots of different things. I was able to overcome some of the challenges of working with hearing people that I hadn't been able to in China. So I was able to see that I could advocate for myself and understand the hearing culture better. I was able to communicate with students and teachers that I hadn't been able to before. I used the accessibility office to work with people. And because of that, I had a lot more experiences and a lot more learning opportunities. And I was able to become a lot more independent in the hearing world. And I became an activist. And it gave me more energy to keep on my goals. At Gallaudet University, really, because we're all the same, I didn't really have to think about human rights and those kinds of issues because we were all used to being in the same realm. But at American University, I really learned the value of human rights because I'm seeing the different aspects and the diversity of cultures and then my struggle within that. And the film program really gave me a lot of expertise in a field that I'm very passionate in. And I feel really lucky to have had the experience at American University because of all the wonderful teachers. Some of them had been working in Hollywood and they had that experience, and it brought me an opportunity to interact and engage with those people. And I worked with some people from the Maryland TV Association that were wonderful, and it gave me another great experience to engage in a wider world. So it gave me a lot of experience to be out in the hearing world and gave me a sense of what I could do and how I could engage with more people. But it also made me realize I need to keep fighting. I couldn't just sit back and let people take care of me or feel sorry for me. I needed to move forward and act.
Great. Thank you. For folks who want to actually learn more about that, we actually got to interview Wei a few years back on our second season of Ripple Effects, which was our podcast that we did for a few years. I'm going to skip a couple of questions here and direct this next one to Justice. Typically, in order to be admitted to a college in the United States, you have to take certain standardized tests. So those tests are like the GRE, for example, the TOEFL. And I want to ask Justice, what kinds of supports did you receive in terms of accommodations in order to take those exams?
Thank you very much, Justin. I would say, fortunately, that it wasn't a requirement. during my application. So I may not have the best answer, but yeah, because the MGA as a whole has that as a requirement that you have to take the GRE and so on and so forth. But my concentration waives it, or let me say waived it, because I don't know the current situation. So I didn't take the examination.
Because of the COVID situation. Okay.
Maybe.
What about you, Wei? Did you have to take any exams? You might not have had to take the TOEFL, but the GRE or any of those other exams, or maybe the
Yeah,
ESSP.
I took the GRE. Mhm.
How was what was that like? Getting reasonable accommodations for that?
So yes, in China, I wasn't able to take the exam. So I went to Gallaudet University through a study program to learn English. And then I took the SAT and graduated, and then went into Gallaudet using the SAT exam. So I wasn't required to go through the GRE for the bachelor's degree. And then when I went to the MFA program at American University, I did have to take the GRE. So I contacted the GRE administrators to set up an interpreter, and they set that up for me. And then when I went to the exam, there was an interpreter there, and the GRE gave me the rules for the exam, and I saw the exam rules clearly through the interpreter. And they also gave me some additional time to take the exam. So I had an additional, a little bit of extra time and was able to pass the GRE.
Thank you, Wei. Now, we're kind of getting into the last home stretch of this discussion, and I've got a lot more questions here to ask the panelists, but I just want to open it up to the audience. If you have any questions that you'd like the panelists to answer, please feel free to chat those into the box, and Joey Lenny can read them out. Joey Lenny, do you happen to, quick yes or no, do you happen to see any questions right now?
No questions.
No.
Right.
All right. Well, encourage people to get your questions in. We can see if we can get the panelists to discuss them. Now, I want to ask Sergio, what steps did you take to research and identify your program that you did in the United States? Was Education USA, which is a network of over 400 advising centers worldwide, helpful in any way in your research?
Well, Education USA is strong in Argentina, but they were not the ones that actually helped me in this regard. And the reason was because I first earned the scholarship, and the scholarship was administered by the Fulbright Commission, which is like, it is deeply related. Like I think Fulbright is part of Education USA or the other way around. So
Yes.
so the Fulbright Commission was the one that helped me, but they didn't help me like to search. In that particular thing of searching was just getting online and starting Googling around and following my intuition and my interests. So I was just Googling around, okay, aeronautics, aviation, airports, airlines, and of course, other keywords. So that's how I got with Embry-Riddle. And the funny thing was that I researched so many universities. The last one that I found was actually Embry-Riddle, and that's the way I ended up.
Your story sounds a lot actually like Justice's story, that how he came to discover Notre Dame, and it sounds like a lot of research, a lot of online. The internet is kind of your friend for finding out kind of what your steps are. And often people will contact the clearinghouse and ask us for recommendations on programs in social work and education and all the like. And really, there's no person who can choose what's best for you than yourself, just kind of by doing your investigations. And Justice, you actually found that Education USA was beneficial for you after you got accepted. So could you tell us about that briefly?
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. I actually got to know. I actually got to know about the Education USA after I got admission.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, what drew me to the Education USA was when I was trying to process my admission. I tried as much as possible not to allow myself make any nasty mistake. I was just nervous, so I tried reaching out to friends who could just be by my side while I surfed the internet or respond to whatever I was supposed to. Nobody was available, and just my intuition told me to look out for the American embassy, because I knew that at the end of the day, I would still have to resort to the American embassy for my visa. So I decided that, okay, let me look out for American embassy to know if they have or they would have any resources or arrangement for somebody like me. So that was when I got to know about the Education USA. And I searched for a telephone number. I called the number and we scheduled an appointment, and I visited them. So ever since, they were so helpful, providing me with necessary details. They helped me in doing some necessary entries and let me say entries and filling of information, like my net ID. The first time I did that was at the Education USA. So that was where I also got oriented on how to present myself or give my answers during the visa interview. So they had a visa orientation for international students, and I was invited, and the anchor or the person who conducted the interview, the orientation, also gave us some general information on how to comport ourselves and behave properly when questions were being asked. So I think all these things are courtesy of the Education USA. And to date, so I still try to keep in touch with them. Yeah.
Thanks. Perfect. That's great. And I think, but I'm going to go ahead and actually, I don't see any questions in the chat. So, but there was an interesting one in the registration, and I'm going to go ahead and direct that to Wei Wang. And so Wei, during the time that you were actually in the United States, how did you identify local community resources outside of the resources that might have been provided by Gallaudet or American University?
Really, when I first arrived in the United States, I didn't know a whole lot. Gallaudet University was my first environment. And I thought after Gallaudet, I would go back to China. But then I did see that American University had an open house. So before I left, I thought I'd take a look. And as I took a look around, I thought, oh, okay. And, I wasn't with an interpreter, but I saw the university and the programs and thought, okay, I'll try it. So I applied. Not even really thinking that I might be chosen. And then when I got the acceptance letter, I was so excited. So I started at the school and I was actually quite shocked. I hadn't really had a lot of confidence in myself. So seeing that I could have this opportunity really gave me a boost of confidence. And uh, then, I'm trying to ask, you know, once I got into the program, deaf Americans would ask me what they should do to get in the program. And some of them were struggling to get into the program, and I had no idea what to tell them. Suddenly, I was a mentor to them, and that was important. And I just kept telling them that you can do it. You can do it. So it was interesting to become kind of a mentor to other American deaf when I felt that they had been mentors to me. And a lot of times there was, it felt isolating because I was the only deaf person, but I didn't want to be afraid. And so luckily American University welcomed me and gave me an opportunity and said, we don't bite, and we have interpreters, we have note takers, we'll write back and forth with you. We're going to do whatever we can to make you feel comfortable. So really, in my world, this changed my perspective from these universities because they gave me a lot of opportunities outside of what I had seen before.
Thanks, Wei. And it sounds kind of like that question. I mean, a lot of students, like probably these students with disabilities, like anybody, when you're in your US host community, you find out resources and information by just talking to folks in your network and through peer mentoring. And I guess as you advance through the ranks, like Wei, you eventually become a peer mentor. So I guess what goes around comes around. And at that point, folks, we are at about 4 past the hour. So that gives us about exactly 60 minutes for this webinar. And I just appreciate everybody joining. A couple final clarifications. Fulbright, in order to learn more about the Fulbright fellowships, I encourage you to go to our website and also visit the information from the Department of State to make sure that we're just getting all the factual stuff out to you. And also I encourage people to keep checking your inbox over the next couple weeks. We're going to send you a satisfaction survey tonight about this webinar, and we would love it if you would fill that out and let us know how we can keep improving our offerings. And also in the next week or two, you should see a transcript and a recording made available at our website, basically on the same webpage as you would currently find the press release. And with that, I wish everybody a great rest of your evening, or to Wei, a great rest of your day. And a great rest of your week as well. And thank you so much for joining us. Bye.